My mother looked me in the eye and said, "Yale is yours, Claire. The money's been waiting since you were 7." The words felt warm at first, like a quilt tucked gently under my chin. I smiled, out of habit more than belief. Something in my dad's silence across the room tugged at the back of my mind, a flicker in his jawline, the way his hand tightened on his coffee mug. But I let it slide. This was supposed to be a moment of joy. The Yale email had come that morning. Subject: Congratulations. My heart had somersaulted. I'd read it twice, then once more out loud to no one. Then I printed it, taped it on the fridge. Janice, ever the picture of maternal grace, clapped her hands and gasped like she hadn't known I'd been aiming for Yale since I was 13. Dad gave me a short nod. Landon barely looked up from his cereal. We were in the living room now. Me with my acceptance packet, Mom with her perfectly arranged face, and Dad scrolling through his phone like the floor wasn't shifting under me. College tuition at Yale wasn't a number. It was a mountain. Nearly $74,000 a year. But this conversation was supposed to be the rope. The promise. "You don't need to worry about any of it," Janice said. "We set up your college fund when you were in 2nd grade. You've worked so hard. This is your reward." Her hand brushed mine. Software familiar. I swallowed the gnawing twist in my gut. "Thanks, Mom," I said. "I just wanted to check the balance before the financial aid deadline." Dad looked up for the first time. "Why would you do that?" "No reason," I said quickly. "Just being thorough." He shrugged. "It's all taken care of." The words dropped like pennies in a fountain, nice, round, and easy to wish on. Landon drifted in from the kitchen, muttering about some tech internship rejection. "Whatever, I'll just take a gap year," he mumbled. Janice turned to him like a magnet to iron. "That's okay, sweetie. You'll find the right thing. Don't stress." I watched her face soften, the way her body turned toward him, like he was gravity. She hadn't called me sweetie in years. "I can help him look at other options," I offered. "There's a few boot camps with good—" "We've got it," Dad said. "He needs time to regroup." Regroup. That was the word they used when Landon crashed and burned again. Not fail. Not give up. Regroup. I stood, holding my acceptance packet like armor. "I'll just go check the account. For peace of mind." Janice tilted her head. "If that makes you feel better." I left before the tightness in my throat turned into something audible. The bank was only 10 minutes away. I didn't want to go. I needed to go. I parked outside and stared at the automatic doors, breathing through the nausea curling in my stomach. Inside, the teller smiled like this was just another transaction. "I need to check a custodial college savings account," I said. She asked for ID, typed a few keys, clicked her mouse. Then she frowned. "There's nothing here," she said, rotating the screen slightly. $0. My pulse roared in my ears. Has it been emptied recently?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Would you like the transaction history?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She printed something and slid it across the desk. I picked it up, scanned. Then I saw it. 3 large transfers over the past year. Same account number. Same recipient name. I gripped the edge of the counter. My voice cracked like thin ice. "To Landon's account?" I should have screamed. But instead I smiled, went home and said thank you for the non-existent fund. Dinner that night tasted like betrayal. I passed the roasted chicken with a hollow grin, nodded along to my mother's words about being responsible with money, and even thanked them, again, for their support. It was performance art, really. Landon made a joke about getting his college refund, and they all laughed. I chewed and chewed, trying not to choke. In my room, with the door locked, I stared at the statement again. The transfers were real. My future had been siphoned away for Landon's repeated failures, gift-wrapped in parental forgiveness. "Trust me, I'm always on your side," my mom had said last year. I remembered how her voice cracked then, as if it pained her to say it. Now I knew why. Lies didn't come easy to her. They came polished. By mid-August, I was in New Haven, alone. I took out a $30,000 emergency loan in a pale blue office on campus. The woman processing my paperwork didn't ask questions. She just slid the forms forward. My hand trembled when I signed. The first night in my dorm room, I cried in the dark. But by sunrise, the tears had dried, and I had a class schedule to memorize. Chemistry, calculus, philosophy. My old dreams repackaged as a fight for survival. I worked part-time at the library shelving books from 8 p.m. until midnight. By day, I tutored struggling undergrads in general chemistry. Every second felt like it cost me something. I kept my grades immaculate. A plus, everyone. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. That's when I met Priya. We sat next to each other in Chem 112. She had this way of scribbling notes at warp speed, and when the professor asked something no one else knew, she always had the answer but never said it out loud. After class one day, she turned to me and said, "You look like someone who hasn't slept since birth." I laughed. Too loud. Too real. We started walking back from class together. Slowly, I learned her parents ran a pharmacy in Jersey. She was a STEM student under the burden of expectation. Perfect daughter, perfect path, perfect nothing. I didn't say much at first. But then one night, in the library, we both reached for the same textbook and burst into laughter. After that, it became routine. Study, coffee, complain, repeat. But I still didn't tell her the truth. That came out somewhere else. I started vlogging. Not for views, not for the world. Just for myself. My laptop became a confessional. Private folders, unlisted videos, somewhere to unload the bitterness so it wouldn't rot me from inside. On October 12th, after a 10-hour day of tutoring and work, I collapsed into bed. Just as I was about to shut off my phone, a notification blinked from Landon's Instagram. A photo. Him, leaning against a brand new Tesla. The caption, "Work hard. Reward harder." I sat up so fast my head spun. He hadn't worked a day in his life. Fingers ice cold, I logged into the bank's online portal again. I had found a way to keep tracking the old fund. My fund. I knew the password. Janice had never changed it. That day, October 10th, there was a new withdrawal. $15,000. Labeled miscellaneous education expense. Transferred straight to Landon's account. My hands didn't shake. My face didn't twitch. I clicked download. Transferred the file to a USB drive I kept hidden behind a false bottom in my drawer. Then I opened my laptop and created a new video diary. A digital file titled simply, Entry 1. I looked into the webcam and typed, "They took my future. I'll build a new one, from their lies." While they toasted Landon's new business, I was designing mine. On scraps, on debt, on sheer fury. Landon posted a photo with a champagne bottle in one hand. A smug grin stretched wide. The caption? Startup? Funded by love. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. Then I locked my phone and went back to sketching flow diagrams on a napkin at the back of a 24-hour cafe. Love hadn't funded anything for me. Fury had. Fury and the need to breathe without strings attached. By January, I'd all but moved into the materials science lab. Priya and I had stayed late after class one night just talking, when the idea hit her. What if we made a nanofiltration device, one that could be assembled in remote communities with minimal tech but maximum output? I added, what if it could clean arsenic-laced groundwater without needing electricity? It wasn't the sexiest idea for a startup, but it was good. Needed. And it could work. We called it Viridia. We started building a prototype using whatever we could scrape together from recycled lab gear and student leftover grants. Nights bled into dawns. Cafes, labs, bus rides. They all became our planning rooms. I was still working 2 part-time jobs and tutoring, but every free second poured into Viridia. We entered the Founders Hatch, a statewide competition for early-stage student startups. First prize? $75,000 in funding plus mentorship. I didn't tell anyone from home. They wouldn't have understood. Or worse, they would have tried to sabotage it. When we submitted our application, I held my breath. 3 days later, we got an email. You've advanced to round 1. But the high didn't last long. Yale's Entrepreneurship Center required a financial sponsor, or institutional backer, to release lab grants. I had none. When I went to plead my case, the administrator glanced at my file and said, "Your family lists you as independent by choice. I'm afraid that disqualifies you." Independent by choice. It made my stomach curl. That wasn't true. I hadn't chosen this estrangement. I had survived it. Later that week, Priya confessed something over greasy fries and watery coffee. My parents told me if I pursue STEM, they'll stop paying for school. I told them I was majoring in literature. I lied. We sat there across from each other, both of us balancing on the edge of borrowed time and forged identities. "You know," I said slowly, "we may not have families that believe in us, but maybe that's the reason we'll make it." She nodded. "Because we have to." I needed that reminder. I was scrolling through old emails one night, organizing files on my drive when I saw it. A forwarded message from my mother to Aunt Denise. "Claire turned down college, so we're helping Landon. He needs it more." I nearly dropped my laptop. I saved the email, encrypted it, and added it to the growing collection of digital rot my family had unknowingly gifted me. In March, things began to shift. Our project made it to the final round of the competition. Investors started taking interest. Cautiously, but they were there. I spent 6 sleepless nights in the library designing our final presentation slides from scratch. Colors, flow, storytelling, everything had to be perfect. The night before submissions were due, I paced the corridor outside the library's rare books room, running my pitch out loud to no one. My voice cracked, but I kept going. Then the notification came in. "Congratulations, your team has been shortlisted for the final pitch round on March 12th. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. I ran to tell Priya. We hugged awkwardly, giddy and stunned. 2 days later, another email arrived. "Grandma passed away. Funeral March 15th. You're invited." From an aunt I hadn't heard from in over a year. Suddenly, the battlefields of my life, startup and family, collided, and I knew I'd be walking straight into both. I hadn't seen my parents in 9 months, until the day I stood beside Grandma's coffin and realized the real mourning had yet to begin. The church was dressed in lilies and silence, but the air was sharp with pretense. People spoke in whispers, offered hugs too long, too brittle. I arrived alone, hair tied back, black blazer too big for my shoulders. No one asked questions. No one even looked twice. All eyes were on Landon, flanked by our parents like a war hero returning home. He had the audacity to wear sunglasses indoors. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief, carefully avoiding any acknowledgement of me. My father's lips twitched into something between regret and rehearsed sadness. I stood in the far corner, near the stained glass window where the light bent just enough to make things look more beautiful than they were. I watched the casket. I remembered the way Grandma used to press my hand and say, "You are worth more than they let you believe." The service began. I bowed my head but didn't close my eyes. I couldn't. After the hymns, during the quiet hum of exits and footsteps, someone tapped my elbow. Aunt Margaret. Always polished. Always quiet. The family's unofficial archivist. She handed me a small manila envelope. "This is from your grandmother. She asked me to give it to you." I kept my word. Inside was a single page. A photocopy of Grandma's original will, clearly showing my name listed under Education Trust Beneficiary. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note, the ink shaky, fading. "Don't let them rewrite your future, sweetheart." My throat tightened. I slipped the documents into my bag without a word. Later, when the crowd shifted to the reception hall, I broke away and walked the familiar path to Grandma's old office, a cottage attached to the church property. It smelled of cedar and dried flowers. Her desk was untouched, papers still neatly stacked, mugs placed like she'd just stepped out for tea. I knew what I was looking for, even before I saw it. A tiny flash drive tucked behind her framed photo of us. It was labeled only with my name. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. Inside, folders of scanned documents, tax records, savings account logs, all tracing back to the so-called Clare College Fund. At the bottom, an email. I clicked. From philip.alden@argentcorp.com to West Cove Bank at support. Subject: Fund Transfer Request. Body: Please authorize the full balance of the Clare Educational Fund to be moved into the Landon Ventures Trust. Effective immediately. Date: March 4th, 2024. 11 days before I received my Yale admission. The screen blurred. I blinked hard. Bile rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I saved everything, encrypted it, uploaded it to 2 clouds, 1 local drive, and then wiped the flash from the computer. I slid the USB into my pocket and turned off the light. Outside, I spotted my mother arranging canapes at the edge of the reception. Her eyes flicked past me like I was wallpaper. Landon was telling a story, too loudly, to a small group of cousins. Then a wreath arrived, carried by Priya. She wore neutral colors, held herself like someone who belonged. She nodded politely, introduced herself as my classmate from Yale. Everyone accepted it. No one questioned the delivery. She slipped me a note as she passed. Stage is yours. They won't see it coming. I breathed for the first time that day. On my way out, I found Aunt Margaret in the parking lot, leaning on her car, waiting. I walked up to her and looked her straight in the eye. They stole my future, I said quietly. I'm about to take theirs. While Landon was pitching his fake app to a room full of bored donors, I was about to pitch truth, with proof, to the only crowd that mattered. The convention hall buzzed with nervous energy and overpriced coffee. Startups stood behind polished booths, their founders rehearsing lines about disruption and scalability. Priya and I stood backstage, Viridia's prototype resting in a clear case between us. She smoothed her blazer for the 6th time. I checked my watch. 3:02 p.m. We were on in 8 minutes. From the green room screen, I could see Landon live streaming his own event across town. He stood in front of a large LED screen with the words, "Drop the crypto social network for Gen Z," flashing behind him. I recognized the investors in the audience. Most looked like they were trying to stifle yawns. Landon, of course, grinned as if he had just reinvented gravity. I turned away and opened my laptop. Our slides were clean, concise. The last one sat quietly in wait. A digital landmine wrapped in facts. Ready? Priya whispered. More than ever. When they called our names, the room dimmed slightly and the projector lit up the screen behind us. I stepped forward. We're Viridia, and we're here to clean more than just water. I spoke clearly, the way Grandma taught me. Straight spine, even tone. We outlined the science behind our nanofiltration device, its applications in rural Montana, in communities like Flint, in refugee camps with no clean water. Priya explained how the mesh layers could be replaced with locally sourced fibers. The judges nodded, taking notes. Then came the last slide. Black screen, white text. While my project cleans water, my family cleaned out my future. Gasps fluttered across the room. I clicked again. Up came the screenshots. The $0 0-cent balance from my tuition fund. The transfer log. The email from my father directing the bank to reroute every dollar to Landon's startup trust. Every cent intended for my education, I said, was used to fund a failed series of ventures, including the one being launched right now by my brother across town. I wasn't cut off. I was stolen from. And I have the receipts. I stood there in silence. No theatrics, no tears. One of the judges, a woman in a sleek blue suit, Jessica Ng, the CEO of Stratus Funds, leaned forward. You're exposing your family. Live? I met her gaze. Yes. Priya stepped beside me, holding up the USB drive. And we're emailing every document, she said calmly, to the regional press. Right now. She hit send. I could see her thumb press the screen. Backstage, my phone buzzed. And buzzed again. A call. A voicemail. Then a headline popped up. Yale student claims $90,000 fund was diverted. Family faces scrutiny. The Post-Northwest. Then, Landon's live stream feed glitched, and I knew he was watching. He returned to the screen moments later, voice raised. She's bitter. She's lying. That fund was for... He never finished, because the press had already clipped my pitch. It was on X, Instagram, TikTok. Commenters flooded in. Girl just dismantled generational theft on stage. The quietest rebellion is always the loudest. I returned to the mic for one final sentence. I don't want pity. I want accountability. And I won't stop until the truth drowns the lies. Jessica stood. In my career, I've heard thousands of pitches. But courage like this? That builds more than a filter. It builds a dam against generational silence. She turned to her assistant. Funding approved. Applause erupted. Cautious at first, then roaring. But before I could even step off stage, my phone rang again. This time, I picked up. Claire Alden, a woman's voice asked. This is Alyssa Cole from the Post-Northwest. We need a statement. Investigations are already underway. 2 months later, I watched Landon's company dissolve, my father resign from the board, and my mother's apology land in my inbox. Unread. The headline ran for 3 days before it disappeared into the abyss of the internet. Crypto startup linked to misused educational trust shuts down amid backlash. Landon called it sabotage. I called it gravity. By May, Yale had turned green again. The cherry blossoms spilled like quiet confetti outside the dorms. I sipped coffee, better than that cheap cup I had on my first day, and sat in the library's quietest corner, sunlight warming the back of my neck. I didn't respond to my father's email. Subject line, we owe you. Let's make things right. I didn't open the one from my mother either. I'd seen enough words from them. None ever held. Instead, I focused on what mattered. Viridia had just secured an expansion grant, enough to launch field tests in 2 rural districts. Jessica Ng's team had followed through, and Priya and I had been invited to a small recognition ceremony for student founders making tangible global impact. I wore the same blazer from the funeral, except this time it fit better. At the podium, Jessica gave a short speech about courage and engineering with purpose. I nodded politely, but what I kept hearing were Grandma's words. Don't let them rewrite your future. Afterward, Priya caught me outside the hall. You know, she said, we could build this bigger. Not just filters, training, community engineers, a whole nonprofit. I smiled. An NGO? Why not? It wasn't revenge. It wasn't redemption. It was something in between. A foundation. Something I could build from. That night, I walked back through the library. The same corridor I'd once cried through after registering for loans. I paused, ran my hand along the banister, and whispered, thank you. Not to God, not to them, but to myself. Later in my room, I opened a folder on my desktop. The college fund. Every document was still there. Screenshots, PDFs, the bank logs, the emails. I stared at it for a while. My finger hovered over the delete key, and then I clicked. Not because I forgave them, but because they no longer mattered. The screen went black for a second, then refreshed. Empty. Outside, someone was playing piano from another dorm. The melody was off-key, imperfect, but full of intent. I leaned back in my chair and pulled up the first draft of the NGO proposal. Landon had bet on my silence. My parents had banked on my submission. They were wrong. They bet on my silence. I built an empire on their noise. The girl once burdened by silence had spoken, not with vengeance, but with undeniable truth. What began as a quiet betrayal in a suburban living room ended with an empire built on resilience, not revenge. Justice, in her world, did not arrive with noise. It arrived with evidence, timing, and the courage to say, enough. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth,